4 years ago, I begged my parents to help pay for the heart surgery that might save my life. They said no, because my sister's wedding was more urgent. Yesterday, my mother texted me like none of it ever happened. Can we talk? The message came in while I was folding towels. The ordinary kind of task that pretends life is quiet when it isn't. It was from my mother. Just 3 words. Can we talk? No punctuation, no context. Just her voice, as if lifted from some other decade, echoing in my head with its usual calm detachment. The last time we'd spoken, I was still hooked up to IVs, trying to figure out how I'd survive with a failing heart and no insurance. And now, years later, here she was, as if nothing had happened, as if time had merely paused. I stared at the message, didn't reply. Instead, I stood there in the half-light of my apartment, clutching a dish towel like it could anchor me. The hum of the refrigerator was louder than usual. Everything in that moment felt absurdly quiet. Flashback. 4 years ago. I was 29 and breathless, not in the poetic way, but in the terrifying, heart-skipping kind. The diagnosis came fast. I needed a valve replacement. Urgent, expensive, non-negotiable. I remember sitting at my parents' kitchen table, pale blue tile, a vase of silk roses that hadn't moved in years, and explaining the situation. My mother nodded, not looking at me. My father scratched at a legal pad. Then my sister, Claire, strolled in with her Pinterest wedding board open on her iPad. I'm thinking Tuscany theme, she said, sliding in beside me, oblivious. Ivory lace, rustic chairs, maybe those little twinkly lights? Mom smiled. Dad nodded. I just sat there, an unopened envelope of hospital bills in my lap. Later that night, I asked them, no, begged, for help. It was one of those conversations that changes you, not because of what's said, but because of how easily someone can say it. We wish we could, honey, Mom said gently. But Claire's wedding it's her once-in-a-lifetime moment. I laughed. Not bitter, not yet, just stunned. I might not live to see it. Dad looked away. Mom just said, you're strong, you'll find a way, you always do. And I did. Crowdfunding, medical debt, skipping rent, a second job on top of a third. I lost hair, I lost sleep, but I lived, somehow. The surgery happened in a cheap clinic out of state. I remember waking up alone, my phone full of unread texts from strangers, and absolutely none from home. Claire sent a selfie from her honeymoon in Maui, captioned, best day of my life. It was the day after I'd come out of anesthesia. I didn't reply. Back to now. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Mom, this time longer. Your father's been laid off. The mortgage is falling behind. Claire is struggling with 2 kids and no income. We just need a bit of help. Please. No apology. No mention of the operation, just a quiet plea. Not even a real one. More like a memo. A formality. I opened my banking app, looked at the screen. A draft of a wire transfer sat there, half complete. I had enough. Barely. I could send it. I could help. Again. But my thumb hovered and hovered. Their kitchen flashed in my mind. The smell of lemon cleaner. The vase. The silence after "you're strong." I hadn't cried during the surgery. Not during the debt collectors. Not even on my birthday when I celebrated alone, toasting with stale cake. But now, looking at that screen, I felt something crack. Not dramatic. Just a hairline fracture across whatever belief I still had in family. And yet, guilt tugged at me like a child pulling at my sleeve. You're stronger than them. You can afford to forgive. But I whispered, almost aloud, being strong doesn't mean being used. I closed the app. I didn't hit send. 4 years ago, I walked out of their house with a printout of my diagnosis and a sticky note with a GoFundMe password. That was my inheritance. No warm send-off, no follow-up calls, just quiet, efficient abandonment. I found a roommate through a Craigslist ad and slept on a futon for nearly a year, worked double shifts, sold my car, and put every dollar into keeping my heart ticking. Strangers donated more to my survival than my own family. A man named Carl from Minnesota, who I'd never met, sent $200 with a message that said, "Stay alive, kid." I cried harder reading that than I did when I got the surgery bill. They didn't show up. Not once. No flowers. No, we're proud of you. Just a silence that calcified into something permanent. Now here we are. My mom's second message still glared at me from the screen. Claire's struggling. She's got 2 toddlers now. You know how hard that is. As if I'd somehow missed that in the years she never asked how my chest felt in winter, when the scar ached like a reminder. Claire. She'd been glowing in her white lace gown while I lay pale in a rented hospital bed with an oxygen tube up my nose. I remember her wedding photos arriving by accident. Some shared album invite my mom must have forgotten to exclude me from. Champagne glasses. Teary speeches. Dad dancing like he'd never let a daughter down in his life. I never deleted the photos, not because I cared, but because sometimes it's good to remember what people will celebrate while you're breaking. Last week my mom called. I didn't pick up. But she left a voicemail. Claire's husband lost his job. The kids need formula. They might lose their house. Could I help? The question wasn't really a question. It was an assignment. I went back to that draft transfer. My thumb hovered again. They hadn't changed. They still thought I was the one who would bend because I always had. But something shifted in me the moment I heard my mom say, "You've always been the strong one." That line. That weapon disguised as a compliment. That's what they'd use to justify every omission, every betrayal. I was strong so I could handle being discarded. I was strong, so Claire could be fragile. I was strong, so they never had to be. And the cruelest part? I believed it. For years. I wore that lie like armor. But now I could see it for what it was. An excuse. A permission slip to abandon me. I clicked into the transfer again. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the payment form. Waiting. Just waiting. But I didn't type anything. Instead, I pulled up an old file. A photo from the day I got home after surgery. I'm still hooked up to a monitor, but smiling. Barely. I'd made it. Alone. No family. Just grit and the kindness of strangers. I stared at that version of me and whispered, "We don't owe them." And for the first time in years, I believed it. I didn't respond to my mom's message. Not that night. Not the next day. 3 days later, she left a voicemail that started with concern and ended with subtle punishment. "We just don't understand why you're being so cold," she said. "Claire is your sister. Don't punish her children for choices she didn't make." I almost laughed, as if the guilt card still worked. I know what they think. That I'm withholding help out of spite. That I've turned bitter. That I'm using the past to justify cruelty. But here's what they never understood. It was never about revenge. It was about survival and dignity. And finally understanding that love without respect is just manipulation dressed in a warm tone. They want me to play the role they wrote for me years ago. The reliable one, the fixer, the emotional landfill where they dump every crisis. But that part of me is gone. Burned out in some underfunded clinic in Texas, where a nurse held my hand because nobody else would. Claire sent her own message the next morning. It was a selfie of her holding one of her twins, her face drawn, eyes tired. The caption read, "They don't deserve to suffer just because you're angry." I stared at the photo for a long time. Not at the child, at her, at the perfectly timed sadness in her eyes, at the way she centered herself in a frame meant to provoke. There was no apology, no ownership, just the same weaponized helplessness I'd grown up with. I wasn't angry. I was something much quieter, much colder. I was done. That same afternoon, a box showed up at my door. No return address. Inside was a photo album, my mother's handwriting on the inside cover, in case you've forgotten what family means. Each page was a performance. Baby photos, birthday parties, Christmas mornings where I smiled too hard because I knew if I didn't, someone would accuse me of ruining the mood. In between the nostalgia were gaping holes. No pictures from the year I lived in my car. No pages from the hospital. Nothing that acknowledged the fracture they caused. Just carefully curated moments to sell a story they still desperately wanted to believe. I closed it, gently. I didn't burn it. I didn't scream. I just slid it under the bed and felt nothing. That night, I ran into someone from my old job at the pharmacy, back when I was working 60 hours a week just to keep the lights on. Her name was Nina, and she used to split lunch shifts with me when I couldn't afford a sandwich. She looked surprised to see me. "You look good," she said, her voice light but cautious, like you finally started sleeping. And I realized, I had. For years I hadn't slept. Not really. I'd lie down wired, afraid, waiting for the next betrayal or demand masked as a family emergency. But lately, sleep had become real, solid, safe. That's what boundaries do. They give you back your nights. I went home that evening and reread my mother's message again. Then I opened the banking app and clicked delete draft. Gone. No explanation. No counterattack. Just a clean, deliberate erasure. A line, finally drawn. I made tea, sat on the couch, let the quiet be mine. And I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. And for once, that felt like enough. The silence didn't last. A week after I deleted the draft transfer, my aunt called. The one who never reached out unless someone was dead or getting married. Her voice was tight with something rehearsed. "Honey, your mom's just heartbroken. She says you've shut her out completely." I didn't say anything. "She didn't mean to hurt you," she continued. "She's just overwhelmed. Claire's been through a lot. You've always been so independent. I think they just assumed you'd be okay." There it was again. That myth of my invincibility. As if being alone through major surgery was some kind of badge I'd earned, and now I was obligated to keep wearing it. "I was dying," I said calmly. "They chose flower arrangements and buffet options over my heartbeat." There was a pause on the line. A long one. "Well, maybe they didn't think it was that serious," she offered. "They knew," I said. "They just didn't want it to be true, because then they'd have to act," she sighed. "I'm not trying to take sides, I just think holding on to pain only makes it worse." "Pain didn't ruin this," I said. "Their choices did." After that, she mumbled something about hoping we could find a way back to each other. I told her I appreciated her concern, but I wouldn't be part of any peace talks built on amnesia. I hung up and sat in the dark for a while, not brooding, just still. It's amazing how much noise you can hear when you stop trying to make other people comfortable. The sound of your own boundaries echoing back is deafening at first, but also clarifying. Later that night, I scrolled through Claire's Instagram. I hadn't looked in months. It was exactly what I expected. Polished chaos. Hashtags like #BlessedMama next to photos of her kids wearing matching outfits, while she looked exhausted but glamorously so. The captions were soft cries for validation dressed up as vulnerability. One post hit me harder than I expected. A photo of our parents' front porch. My dad's old rocking chair, the one I used to sit in when I couldn't sleep. Captioned, "Wish things could go back to how they were." I stared at it for a while, not because I missed it, but because I realized. Even Claire missed a version of us that never existed. We were never close. Not really. I was the buffer between her tantrums and our parents' disappointment, the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who didn't ruin holidays. They had never noticed I was breaking, because I broke quietly. And now they wanted me to help put things back together. Not because they regretted breaking me, but because they needed the version of me that used to say yes. But she's gone. That night, I took the photo album my mother had mailed me, walked to the trash chute at the end of the hallway, and dropped it in without ceremony. Not in anger, not as revenge, just as closure. The kind you don't wait for, the kind you give yourself. 2 days later, Claire called me for the first time in almost a year. Not a text, not a voice note, a full-on phone call, like we were still sisters in the way people mean when they say that word with warmth. I let it go to voicemail. She left one. "I know you hate me right now," she said. Her voice cracked a little. Practiced, or maybe real. Hard to tell. "But I didn't make that decision about your surgery. Mom and Dad did. I was planning my wedding. I didn't know how bad it really was. They said you were overreacting, and I believed them. I didn't know." I listened to the whole message with the same blank expression I wear in doctors' offices. Not numb, just used to not expecting anything. She didn't say sorry. Not really. She just said she didn't know. That's always been her defense. She never knows until the fallout hits. I remember once, when we were kids, she accidentally told our entire extended family I'd failed my driver's test. It wasn't malice. It was casual, careless. She didn't mean to humiliate me. She just thought it was kind of funny. That's always been her way, causing damage without intent, and expecting that to mean there was no harm. But intent doesn't heal bruises, and ignorance doesn't undo absence. I spent the afternoon walking around the lake near my apartment. I hadn't been there in weeks. It was colder than I expected, and I didn't bring gloves, but the sting in my hands helped me stay present. Somewhere between mile 2 and 3, I realized something that should have been obvious. I didn't want them to say sorry. Not anymore. I wanted them to stop acting like they didn't know what they did. There's a difference. Sorry is easy. Sorry is transactional. But acknowledgement? That's rare. That's heavier. Claire doesn't want to carry that weight. She wants things to feel fixed without fixing them. That evening, I got another message from Mom. "Claire's crying. Please, for me, just call her back. She looks up to you." That line, "she looks up to you." The same phrase they used when they told me not to make a scene about the wedding, not to ruin Claire's moment, not to show my pain, not to make them feel bad. She looks up to you, so stay silent. She looks up to you, so disappear quietly. What they meant was, be better than us, so we never have to be better ourselves. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my journal, the one I hadn't touched since recovery, and wrote a single sentence. I don't owe them the version of me they abandoned. Then I closed it. Let the silence stay. It was finally mine. I knew it wouldn't end with silence. The next week, my father called. That alone was unusual. Growing up, he was the kind of man who communicated through nods, grunts, and the sound of a door closing a little too hard. So when his name lit up my phone, I stared at the screen, half expecting it to vanish like a ghost. I didn't answer. His voicemail was short, measured, emotionally efficient. "We don't deserve forgiveness. But your mother's not well. Stress, mostly. Claire's situation's taking a toll. If you can help, anything would mean a lot." That was the entire message. Not a single word about the heart surgery. Not a question about how I was doing. Just a quiet appeal to my capacity for guilt, as if that well would never run dry. It almost worked. Almost. I sat with it for an hour. Thought about my mom's brittle wrists, the way her hands shook when she got overwhelmed. I thought about the possibility, however remote, that she really was sick. That maybe this wasn't another manipulation, but something real. And then I thought about the last time she saw me post-op, which was never. I thought about how she called me dramatic when I told her I was scared of dying, about how she said Claire's wedding wasn't something that could be postponed, and how, "You're young, your heart will bounce back." I remembered holding the hospital bill, curled up on my bathroom floor, wondering if it would be better to disappear entirely, because maybe then they'd finally notice I wasn't okay. But they never did. They didn't come. They didn't call. They didn't even send a card. And now I was being asked to rescue the same people who left me drowning. That night, I didn't sleep much. My chest ached, not physically, not the heart, but something deeper, more corrosive, a kind of sadness that doesn't have an outlet, like you're grieving people who are still alive. By morning, I'd made a decision. I wrote a message to my dad, one I reread twice, not to soften it, but to make sure it said exactly what I meant. "I'm sorry Mom's unwell, but I can't be your emergency contact every time life doesn't go to plan. I needed help once. You made a choice. Now I'm making mine." Then I blocked the number. It felt like closing a door that had always been slightly ajar, just enough to let in the draft. And for once, the silence that followed wasn't haunting. It was clean, solid, a door that would stay shut unless someone knocked like they meant it. Claire emailed me. She hadn't emailed me since we were kids, back when we shared a clunky family desktop and she used pink fonts and butterfly gifs. But this time, it was plain text. No greeting, no sign-off. Just, "You don't have to forgive us, but you're punishing people who had no control over what happened. My kids are going to grow up thinking you didn't want them. Is that what you want? It hit like a punch wrapped in silk. Not because it was true, but because it was designed to feel that way. I stared at the screen for a long time. That trick, that turn, using her kids like a shield, was so on brand it almost made me laugh. Almost. They always find a way to reframe it, to make my silence look like cruelty, to make my boundaries feel like neglect. But here's the thing Claire never understood. I don't owe her children a lie. I don't owe them a version of myself that doesn't exist. I won't show up with gifts and birthday cards and pretend we're a family, because that would teach them something worse than absence. It would teach them that love means swallowing pain for someone else's comfort, and I won't teach them that. I wrote her back. Not for her, but for me. 3 lines. You made your choice when you believed them without asking me. I made mine when I survived without you. Your kids don't need me. They need a mother who doesn't use guilt as currency. Then I logged off. That weekend I visited the clinic where I had my follow-up after surgery. I hadn't been back in almost 2 years, but I remembered every tile, every chair. The waiting room still had the same faded magazines, the same humming fluorescent lights. A nurse recognized me. "You're the one who brought cupcakes after recovery," she said, smiling. I'd forgotten I did that. Or maybe I hadn't. Maybe I just tucked it away. A small act of gratitude in a time when I had nothing else to give. I sat in the waiting room for 20 minutes, just breathing, letting the past settle. This place, this quiet, bare, understaffed clinic had done more for me than my entire family had. It didn't promise comfort, but it gave me care. And I realized that healing didn't look like reconciliation. It looked like this, remembering where I began again, and who helped me find that starting point. When I left, I took a longer route home, drove past my parents' neighborhood, slowed near their cul-de-sac. The porch lights were on, same house, same porch swing, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a place I used to survive. And now, I was living. The email from Claire was still sitting in my inbox days later, unread again, though I'd already memorized every word. I didn't delete it. I didn't reply either. I just let it sit there like the ghost of an old bruise I refused to scratch open. Then came the package. No name on the return address, but I knew the handwriting. My mother's cursive, too neat to be warm. Inside was a stack of Claire's children's drawings, crayon portraits of Auntie, stick figures with bright red hearts. One drawing showed a house by a lake that looked suspiciously like mine. Another had the words, "We miss you," in jagged letters across the top. At the bottom of the box, there was a note. They don't know what happened. They just know they had an aunt once who disappeared. My hands were shaking, not from rage, but from something worse. The temptation to soften, the pull of being seen again, even through a lens I didn't choose. But I reminded myself, this was not an olive branch. This was emotional bait. If they really cared about rebuilding, they'd start with the truth, not crayons and guilt. I set the box aside. That evening I had dinner with Marissa, a friend I'd made during the hardest part of recovery. She was the kind of person who asked how you were and actually waited for the answer. Over soup I told her about the box, the email, the door I wasn't sure if I should leave cracked open. She listened, didn't jump to fix anything. Then she said, "You know, just because someone hands you a story doesn't mean you have to hold it." That stayed with me all night. Because that's what they'd always done, hadn't they? Handed me stories of duty, of forgiveness, of family above all, and expected me to carry them without question. But I don't want to be the keeper of their redemption arc. I don't want to be the one who proves love can survive betrayal just so they can sleep better at night. That's not healing. That's performance. I took the drawings, placed them in a small folder, and tucked them in the back of my closet. Not out of anger, just boundaries. If those kids grow up and ever want to know me for real, not the version filtered through Claire, they'll find their way. But I won't be a ghost that flickers in and out of their narrative depending on who needs what. Not anymore. Later that night, I walked down to the lake. It was cold. The kind of cold that stings your cheeks and makes everything feel sharper. I stood by the edge, watching the water shift under the wind, and I thought, this is what peace actually looks like. Not quiet because someone silenced you, but quiet because you finally stopped explaining yourself. It took another 10 days before the next move came, this time from my mother directly. A letter, handwritten, 4 pages, no envelope return address, just my name in familiar script. I didn't open it right away. I left it on the kitchen table like something radioactive, passed by it each morning, each night, pretending it wasn't whispering at me. On day 3, I opened it. The first line read, "You've always been difficult to reach." I almost stopped there, but I kept going. She wrote about her regrets, not in a way that acknowledged what happened, but in the language of omission. We did our best. We were under pressure. I wish things had been different. No ownership, just passive sadness. As if the wedding just happened to be prioritized over a life-saving operation, as if the money wasn't really ours to spare, as if the betrayal was mutual, not one-sided. The letter turned eventually, the way it always does, toward hope. I believe we can still find our way back to each other. We miss you. Claire is lost without you. The kids ask about you every day. Then came the final sentence. I know you still love us, deep down. You always have. That's what stayed with me. Because it's true. I do. And that's the hardest part. I don't hate them. I never have. But love doesn't cancel out harm, and it sure as hell doesn't entitle someone to access you after they've discarded you. I sat on my balcony that night, the letter folded in my lap, and watched the windows flicker on in the building across the street, one by one. People settling in for the night, families, noise, closeness. I used to ache for that, to be folded back into something warm and familiar, to be forgiven and forgiving in the same breath, to sit at a table without flinching every time someone used the word family. But now I know that longing comes from the child in me. The adult knows better. The adult has her own table, her own quiet, her own name said gently in her own home. I didn't write back. I didn't call. Instead, I took the letter, folded it again, neatly, respectfully, and slid it into a drawer I rarely open. Not out of pettiness, not out of rage, but because some doors don't close with slams. They close with a click, soft, final, and you walk away knowing you've chosen yourself. 3 months later, I ran into Claire. It wasn't dramatic, no storm, no public scene, just a quiet Tuesday at the grocery store, both of us reaching for the same brand of cereal like we were still kids in the same kitchen. She froze. I did too. Then she smiled, hesitant, like someone trying on a face she hadn't worn in a while. Hey, I nodded. Hey. We stood there, neither moving. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. In another aisle, someone's kid was crying. Life went on, completely unaware of the weight in that small, stale space between us. You look good, she said, because that's what people say. I thanked her, reached for the box. She let go first. I didn't think I'd see you again, she added. I didn't think I'd want to be seen, I said before I could stop myself. She winced, just slightly. But to her credit, she didn't get defensive. She just nodded, biting her lip like she was holding back something too big for a cereal aisle. I'm sorry, she said finally. And this time, it didn't sound like a performance. It didn't sound like strategy. It sounded like someone who had finally stopped editing the truth. I didn't say anything. She kept going quietly. You were right. About all of it. About Mom. About me. About how we treated you like an afterthought, then expected you to save the day when it got inconvenient. I looked at her. Really looked. She was tired. Older than I remembered. Motherhood had softened her face in some places and hardened it in others. I can't fix what we did, she said. And I'm not asking you to forgive us. I just wanted you to know. I see it now. That hit harder than any apology. I nodded slowly. Thank you. Then, without drama, we parted. No hugs, no promises. Just two adults with shared history and separate futures. I got in my car and sat there with the engine off, fingers still wrapped around the steering wheel. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just breathed. Sometimes healing doesn't come with closure. It comes with truth spoken quietly in unexpected places. It comes when you stop waiting for them to understand everything and start recognizing that it's enough they finally saw something. That night, I reopened the banking app, not to send money, but to update the beneficiary on my emergency fund. My name, no one else's. For once, that didn't feel selfish. It felt like peace. Not the peace that asks for permission, but the kind you earn, slowly, by choosing yourself again and again even when it hurts, especially when it hurts.